Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us for Bible study tonight. I am very glad to have you, and I'm really glad to continue our discussion on Bible archaeology. Quick shout out to Christina for running the slides for us today to make sure things run smoothly, and
Thank
the help
you.
from Pastor Jim in running our Zoom. So thanks for everybody for being here and letting your resident history nerd lead us in our conversation today. So before I dive into this week, which is about places in Bible archaeology. I just wanted to give like the quickest of summaries from our last time by just sharing our conclusions from our last Bible study. So when we talk about Bible archaeology, we're talking about the connection between scripture and history and the peoples and places that are proven through things like artifacts, like coins, artifacts, manuscripts, and documents. And boy, is Christina good. So these are our conclusions from last time. So first and foremost, many of the discoveries that we get to look to when we think about proving the Bible through history and the Bible as a historic record itself is the fact that many of the times that people sought to disprove the Bible and disprove what we understand and believe to be true, they accidentally proved the existence of people and places that we know
Yeah,
of
no, I
today.
love that. That's so cool.
Yeah. One of the best examples is King David. Many years, they believed King David was more like a King Arthur figure, more myth than real person. And then they found an artifact that actually had a carving about King David. So by searching to disprove him, they actually proved his existence. Our other conclusion from last time is one very important and close to my heart, which is that science and scripture do not conflict and they do not have to. God is the God of the universe. He created all these things. He created physics as we understand it, and he created and he's overseen and he knows all of history. And it is our opportunity to engage with God when we engage with those things in the wonder of those things. So I want to encourage us today and always that discovery can encourage our faith and show us the bigness and thoroughness of God and that interconnectivity throughout both history and scripture. So that brings us to our today session. So after we talked last time, we focused on first and foremost what archaeological tools are really fun and interesting and encouraging to us. So first, in case you weren't with us last time, I do just want to do the nope, you were on the right slide, Christina, in the new one. What is archaeology? So archaeology formally is the study of ancient and recent human past through material remains. So if you know what I do for a living, I work with paper, like manuscripts, when people wrote things down on papyrus and vellum and the Declaration of Independence. But archaeology is about physical artifacts, things that people manipulated and touched and held dear. And then it's also through archaeological sites. So like the images on this slide. So the physical places where people lived, farmed, cooked, had meals around their tables. There are discoveries of all of these things, and they help support our understanding of the Bible. So these are just our quick definitions for today. So again, artifacts are just the things that archaeologists analyze to learn more about the people that made them and use them. Artifacts are also one of our primary ways of talking about evidence. So I have a picture here that is really interesting as Christina gets back to we're still in this week, Christina. You're good. We don't have to go back to the previous one anymore. I try to include the content. The most common evidence that we look for when talking about people and places, or that we discover, are things like inscriptions, like the Tel Den Stele, which was the one I mentioned earlier. Art is a really big one, like frescoes on prominent buildings, but also things like money, ceramics, and earthenware.
Christina,
So
move down some more. Two coins in a building.
she's in last week's. We can go to this week's on slide 3. But does
I think
anybody
I
have
am in 3. No?
you're
Background?
in that's last week's presentation or last month's presentation, Christina.
Oh, was I in the right one earlier?
You were. I think you meant to close this one and you closed the other one.
Interesting.
That's okay. But all that to say, not a huge deal because I was just giving a little bit of a refresher from last time. So we are, so that's the first session.
Hmm.
Got to open twice. So it should be week 2 Bible archaeology. It was attached to the email. Maybe it's not on the calendar invite.
Oh, but it looked right because, okay, hold on.
Yeah, because it had similar slides.
Hi, Jason. How are you?
I am very well, thank you.
That's the one, Christina.
There we go.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry. Let me put my do not disturb on. You guys don't need to know about
Totally good.
Alex issues.
So
All right.
we are going to explore different kinds of artifacts and evidence in proving places today. Before we move on, one, I just wanted to show you that is a coin of Julius Caesar. So that's both a physical artifact from a specific time period that we can trace his reign from, but also evidence of a person. So that proves both a person and a place. So things like that are very enriching and help us with these conversations. Before I do jump into some of the specific oh, actually, this is people, not places. I apologize. Some of the specific people that have been proved through various archaeological means. Does anyone have a question so far? I want to make sure I give the opportunity for that. Oh, where's Gail when you need her with the Jeopardy theme song?
If she checks in, it'll be in a half hour.
No, totally fine, totally fine. So
Can you set the stage of where we were and then what we're talking about today?
yeah. So our overall scope of discussion is the fact that archaeology as a field is meant to help us understand history and its people. And the use of those tools can also be working in tandem with our biblical sources, and they can actually support one another. We talked about in our first session what biblical archaeology is, how the tools are used, and now we're exploring in this session and the following one some specific examples that we have exciting proof from multiple external sources that help us support and even further understand the context of the people that we read about in the Bible. So our first example for today is actually an Old Testament example, and it is King Herod. Oh, New Testament example, I apologize. So King Herod, we know King Herod as a very menacing figure in Jerusalem when the Magi, or the wise men, arrived looking for the new king who had been born. We understand Herod as the figure that is very concerned about maintaining his power. He's the one that orders the murder of young babies in order to try and snuff out the life of Jesus Christ, even though he did not know who exactly it was because the wise men did not go back. Really interesting evidence that we have for Herod outside our biblical text and references. I have two examples here. The first is known as the amphora fragment. It's featured on the left, and it bears a Latin inscription that says, belonging to Herod, king of Judah. Herod was really well known for, even outside of the biblical account, cruelty, and he was very famous for it, which is why it is actually believable in the historic account that he would have done what was described in the book of Matthew. So Matthew 2:16 says, then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent for and killed all the male children in Bethlehem, and all in that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. There's a quote from a historian and an archaeologist that actually really talks about the fact that the sad reality is that the slaughter of boys in Bethlehem may have been too insignificant for the event itself to be notated in the same way. However, it is consistent with the character. So the character of Herod, as found in this source and others, says the slaughter of innocents is unattested in secular records, but the historical plausibility of the event happening is consistent with the character and actions of Herod the Great. Besides killing his enemies, he had no qualms in killing his family members and friends as well. Herod would not have given a second thought to killing a handful of babies because they believed it would have been maybe about 20 children at that time, so it didn't make the record in the same way. I see a comment. We know he has a cruel vibe. Absolutely agree. So, one way that we've seen the evidence of Herod, and it's backed up by the character outside of our biblical source, is this fragment on the left, which is more like a small piece of tablet, but not exactly. Other than his cruelty and the way in which he got into power and maintained his power, he was actually known as a builder. So up top on this slide is actually an example of a hippodrome that has an inscription that it was built by Herod the Great. But Herod did so much building that he constructed palaces, ports, theaters, stadiums, gymnasiums, water systems, and gardens. He was very, very fascinated in having, presumably based on the amount of things that he built, he wanted there to be a lasting physical evidence of his own reign and of his own perceived self-importance. So those are two different kinds of archaeological findings that help prove a character of the Bible that actually gets very little screen time. So Herod in our Bible is in Matthew chapter 2, and it's when the wise men go to him. So he was the overseer of Jerusalem from the Roman side. So they were the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem, but the actual governance was Rome, and Herod was that governance. So the terminology we use for King Herod or Herod the Great, there were lots of different names for leaders that were in charge, but he's referenced in the book of Matthew very early on. And that's his role. His role is that he was the Roman leader of that section of the empire, hence why he was so prideful and had so much power over the people of Jerusalem, even though he was not a Jew. Great question. Yes, Will?
Herod, cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
We know what is said in the Bible, but is it also said by different Jewish historians?
Oh, it is substantiated by both Jewish and secular historians, especially particularly to maintain in power. He killed several people that could have succeeded him. Let me check my notes if I have an exact example here. If I don't have the exact example written down, on these slides that I sent out to you, that image in the top right corner, the perfect little square, is actually a link to an article specifically about Herod.
Okay, good.
I
Thank
always
you.
try to cite my sources.
Good, good.
Yeah, so I don't have the exact people he killed written down, but it is in that article. And it is really interesting because he was pretty non-discriminate in who he would kill to maintain power. So the fact that he would do everything he could to keep Jesus from rising to power is not surprising. It's very in line with his personality. Okay. Our second person, unless anyone else has a question, is actually the prophet Isaiah. So
There is a article by National Geographic, but I think it is paywalled. But it looked interesting.
there is, so it's, yeah, there is, it is paywalled. It is pretty annoying.
Mm.
But there's a great one on Smithsonian Magazine for a few of these finds, which is pretty interesting as well. I focused on the prophet Isaiah actually because for a long time, much like King David, he was a figure that was only substantiated in the Bible, and many people sought to disprove that he existed and was more of a mythic prophet, like King Arthur type figure, Robin Hood type figure, that he wasn't really real. But then archaeological digs and surveying in Israel actually resulted in finds about Isaiah. So we know Isaiah as a powerful prophet who saw into the throne room of heaven and foretold the coming of Christ, like many of the messianic prophecies that we turn to see that through line and consistent thread through the entirety of Scripture come from Isaiah. And the evidence of Isaiah outside of our biblical text, other than the entire book that he wrote, and he also wrote Lamentations. Rough, that's rough, buddy. No, yes. Isaiah? No, it was Jeremiah. I lied. Take that back.
Right, I was going to say
It's Jeremiah. Either way, very prominent book in our Old Testament. When they were doing the archaeological work in Israel, they actually found a clay seal. Yeah, absolutely, Christina. A clay seal bearing Isaiah's name. even more prominent, so that is on our left on our slide right now. So that clay seal has the name of the prophet Isaiah impressed upon it. But there's also, excuse the typo, a secondary clay impression that's known as a bulla that actually bears King Hezekiah's seal, which they were extant at the same time. They were contemporary to one another. So the fact that those two finds were found in the same general area, less than 10 feet from one another, were really good substantiating evidence that this person existed. So it's enjoyable to see the connections be made, especially when they're not expected. So I really liked this one. As I went through to find some of these, I wanted to share with you some examples of figures that not only are proved, but are not as easy to prove. That like real scholarship had to be done in order to do them, right? In order to substantiate it by sources that could be both understood and valued by historians of all areas, whether they be a person of faith or not. Any questions on Isaiah other than my slip on what books you wrote?
I think I have a question.
Yes.
So the clay seal bearing his name,
Yes.
so just one of my thoughts was like, is it like specifically him, or could there be other people named Isaiah, or like what tied it to him specifically?
So the remainder of the text around it is what led to the conclusion that it is actually the prophet Isaiah. So that was, this is a really great article about it.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
And as Christina said, the location and time is also important. So something I'll be even clearer from the scientific process side of it. So it's not just that they found this clay tablet in some sand and they were like, oh, cool, it's a seal for the prophet Isaiah. They found it in a specific layer. So archaeology isn't just what's found on the surface. They go through and very carefully, literally dig layer by layer with brushes and tiny shovels. It's very
and different layers
work.
are from different eras. They're known as strata, and they can date something fairly specifically.
Right.
That's cool.
So they found these two seals in a specific layer that they could date to the lifetime of both Isaiah and King Hezekiah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The perfect question, because it ties together the fact that like multiple pieces come together in order to provide that evidence. It's not just, oh, it says the guy's name. Great. That was the same with the artifact with King David's reference on it. It was dated to the same time period that he would have lived. So it was backed up by that and additional writings by different kings that were writing and living at the same time as him. So it's piecing all of those together to make one cohesive puzzle.
Awesome.
Typically in archaeology, when Mandy will explain this better, but I'm going to give it a shot. When they find things in the same layer, close to each other, it really symbolizes that they were contemporaries. They were there at the same time. They were doing the same thing. And that particular two pieces of seals simply substantiate Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Hezekiah died, I'm sorry, never mind, no point at all there.
Hezekiah, you were right. Hezekiah it's on the, yeah.
And they were in that same, it's evidence that they were in the same time frame, just the same as it's reference to them in the same time frame in Scripture.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's a perfect segue, Cassandra, for us to go into this next one. This one was kind of my favorite of all of the ones I wanted to highlight tonight. And it's because to me, it's very unique. So this example doesn't actually prove the prophet Amos's existence, but it proves the veracity and accuracy of his writings, which I thought was a really fantastic comparison tool. So there's very little evidence for Amos the person, but archaeology has actually substantiated what he wrote about in the very first verse of his book. So the book of Amos opens, The word of Amos, one of the shepherds of Tekoa, what he saw concerning Israel 2 years before the earthquake, when Uzziah was king of Judah and Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, was king of Israel. He's very specifically dating the writing of his prophecy based on a natural disaster. And for a long time, there was consideration of if that natural disaster actually occurred or didn't. However, there's now been numerous 8th century BC sites, and as Mandy said, they're finding it in the layers, right? That archaeologists have found massive amounts of earthquake damage. So, and it's not just one location, it's all throughout that area, like in the Levant. That's the word I wanted. Yep, in the Levant. So, taken together with the synchronized dating, it substantiates the evidence of scripture in a roundabout way for this prophet. It's also really
That's why we write things down, guys.
exactly.
Yes, document everything.
Yep. Always write something down. We write things down. Like we have evidence of history because somebody took the time to write down their personal experience or what they were going through. We are part of history today that our next generation will be looking to understand the context of our time. You know, right now at my work, we have researchers that come in and really want to read petitions from 1920 because they want to understand how women felt about gaining the right to vote. Right?
That's
That's
really
only
cool. I love
100
that.
years ago. And if those women
Yeah.
didn't write petitions and letters to their government officials or even their own personal journals and diaries, we wouldn't actually really know what the everyday experience was. So while that's not the same as scripture, the concept is the same because we write these things down and it explains the context and what they meant. And it also, as Mandy says, it dates it. Christina said in the comment, that's why the writers opened with the info, and it's referenced in 2 separate books of the Bible. So in this case, the Bible was also used to substantiate findings outside of religious studies. And I really wanted to pinpoint that because one of the things that always draws my attention, and I shared a little bit about this last time, is that the Bible, whether people want to, right, believe and follow the ways of God, right, it itself is a historic record. There's no doubting when they were written. Like a few of them might have a circa date, so there's not an exact date like the temple in 70 AD. But these books have approximate dates of when they were written, if not exact ones, like Amos, that people will turn to in their historical studies to help understand what was going on at that time in human history, not just Jewish and Christian history. So seeing it work both ways, where our modern sciences help us prove the existence of things and understand scripture better. Scripture also is something that historians turn to get context and understanding of history itself, especially in that region of the world. Yeah, that's a really great point, Christina. So Christina said in the chat, you'll notice they often reference several kings from other nations. And that's incredibly key because in our writings they do, but also in the writings of the other kings, they do that. Several of our substantiated evidences of other kings, one of which is in a future slide, is because it talks about that king being held captive in Babylon. So the king of Babylon was bragging about having captured that king, you know, from Israel. So it works both ways. So for the rest of our slides for tonight, they're all kind of rapid fire because I didn't want to throw too much at you. And as you can tell, I get really nerded out and very excited about these things. Like I read 3 different articles and tried to read a 4th National Geographic article to Christina's earlier comment about the Amos one. So I have 8 pages of notes that I'm trying to condense down for you guys today. So to go into our rapid fire portion, which I also called our quick hit examples. The first one is Jehoiachin, which is actually the example I was just giving you a moment ago. So they found ration tablets talking about Jehoiachin. So tablets from the royal archives of Nebuchadnezzar II, emperor of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which again is a name we recognize from scripture. Or if you watched VeggieTales, the bunny, you know. So he was a familiar figure, and in when they were unearthing and going through that area of the world in the ruins of Babylon, they found these tablets about rations paid for captives and the craftsmen who lived in and around the city. So, like, how much food they were being provided was documented. So, kind of imagine like a government inventory or manifest of like where the resources were going. So these tablets were actually documenting the rations that were provided to the king of the land of Judah. And it's mentioned along with his 5 sons listed as royal princes. So we're seeing not just the name, but the fact that he was there and captured. And that substantiates the entirety of the biblical account, not just that he existed, because we know that that did happen to that king at that time in Judah. Uh, thank you for enjoying all of my nerding out, guys. Appreciate that. Okay, this one is my favorite for various reasons, but Xerxes the First is most famously known. There's a lot of evidence for his existence, and we know him from the Book of Esther. But he's also called Ahasuerus, which is the name Pastor Barble likes to use just to mess with me. Many figures from that period of history would have had a yes, Dave. Yep. That is also the same king from the Battle of Thermopylae. You are absolutely correct. He was a conquering king and he wanted to take over Greece. But he was known, it is Brad, I fully agree with you. So he was really known for going out far and wide. So we know him from the Book of Esther, and being, for such a time as this, and Esther going before this king. But imagine that small Jewish woman, I assume she was small, maybe she was hardy like me, going before this powerful king that built all of these beautiful and like fortified areas that also went up against the Greeks and wanted to conquer all these places. So we get to have a deeper understanding of, the fear and trembling Esther must have had in her heart to go towards this man, her husband or not, to ask for that favor. So this is one of the places that he built. It's called the Gate of Xerxes, or the Gate of All Nations, and it's in Persepolis. And he's also mentioned in Herodias' histories. So he's substantiated multiple times outside of our biblical account. And at the Gate of All Nations, we know that he was involved in it because there's an inscription in the gate known as the XPA inscription, because archaeologists love to name things with specific special nomenclature. And it was constructed during the reign of King Xerxes. So it's right on the physical architecture itself, that he was integral to the building of the site. And I have one more, which is kind of a trick question. And I'm sorry, Bill, it is not the one you asked me for, but it's the same kind of discussion.
Okay.
So, and I will look into that one for you specifically, but I want